I'm Trent Clements. I'm a political science major, and I did my topic for my research paper on India and Pakistan relations. I chose this because at the time there was conflicts going on in Pakistan and India that had to relate to the border disputes over Kashmir and Jammu. The background of India before its independence was is that it was predominantly controlled by two religions, Hinduism and Islam. The Muslims were considered to be a second class citizen and were often treated much more poorly than Hindus were. Uh, and because of this, the Muslims desired to have their own country to get away from the prejudices of them being Muslim. Before World War II, India was devastated by their own Great Depression, and because of this Great Depression, it had led to a lot of unemployment and food shortages, and ended up having to do with food rationing. In some of the major cities where the food rationing was prevalent, there had been a lot of hunger and devastation amongst the people, and then Bengal suffered their own major famine that caused around 30,000 deaths in 1942. There was a civil unrest because of all this unemployment, and the British couldn't maintain the colony anymore because they didn't have as many troops to maintain law and order because of World War II going on, and they had to focus more on the European scale of the war. And on the 16th of August in 1946, when Muhammad Ali Jinnah called for a direct action day by followers of the Muslim League in support for demanding their own region for the Muslims. Uh, and because of this day of the direct action, it had dissolved into random violence and civil disruptions across North India with thousands of deaths, where the Muslims would go out and pull Hindus out of their homes and lynch and kill them in the streets. Whenever India did gain its independence from uh, Britain in 1947, Britain also gave Pakistan their own freedom, and this freedom of their own land was with strong support from large Muslim landowning families, which quickly became the elite of Pakistan. And after the years of fighting with India and with Britain, it had gained its independence in August of 1947. There was a great migration due to the creation of Pakistan and India, where the Muslims would want to go north or to the east so that way they could live with their fellow Muslims in Pakistan, and then the Hindus who lived in these regions wanted to go south so that way they could be with their people in southern India. And around 10 million of these people were migrating, and was known as the largest migration in human history. And because of these migrations, there would often be riots and fighting that occurred in the street, which was the cause of about 1 million deaths. Shortly after these two nations were created, conflicts quickly erupted between the two because of the death of Muhammad Ali Jinnah in 1948, who held most of the semi-peaceful relations with India together. Uh, After his death, almost immediately after his death, there was conflict over whether India had the claim to Kashmir or did uh, Pakistan have claim over Kashmir. And because of this, fighting broke out, and then inevitably they just created a borderline, a ceasefire borderline. In 1965, another war had erupted between India and Pakistan, which at the beginning of the phases it just had to do with a small little border fight between Indian troops and Pakistani border patrol. But then in August of 1965, it broke out into full scale war because the government of Pakistan launched a covert offensive across the ceasefire line, which was created in 1948. Uh, and then in earlier September of 1965, India retaliated by crossing the border to assault Pakistani troops. And then this war was resolved in 1966 because the governments came together and they said that they wanted to solve all their future disputes through peaceful means. This didn't happen, however, because 6 years later, There was a civil war that broke out in 1971, uh, which East Pakistan wanted to be a separate entity from West Pakistan, and the violence continued to ensue, and India decided they would invade East Pakistan so that way they could support Indian civilians who had lived there, and then this had caused millions of civilians that lived in East Pakistan that weren't like Indian citizens. They fled south. Uh, then East Pakistan ended up winning the civil war, and they gained their independence from Pakistan and became currently known as Bangladesh. And then in 1989, there was a Kashmir insurgency where armed resistance to Indian rule broke out in the Kashmir Valley because Kashmirian militants wanted to either be a separate country or they wanted to be with Pakistan. Then in 2001, there was extreme hostilities and tensions across the ceasefire line, and people were afraid that this could cause war. And India kept blaming Pakistan on backing these militants that lived in Kashmir, and eventually these conflicts just died out. And there was several conflicts between 2001 and 2016, which constantly escalated and then declined. And then recently, in October, there were exchanges of fire between the Pakistani border troops and the Indian border troops. And then eventually it escalated to the point where they started launching artillery fire at one another. And ever since then, there has been constant shootings on either side. I believe that this could be solved if designated land back in 1947 based on ethnicity and religious beliefs and the people that lived in these areas rather than geographical location, and giving the northern region to the Pakistanis and then the southern region to the Indians.